If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story.
The city had long since forgotten Elias Kane. Once, he had been the underworld's most feared enforcer, a ghost who moved through the shadows, leaving behind nothing but bodies. He was the boogeyman criminals feared in their nightmares, the name whispered in hushed tones by those smart enough to stay out of his way. Then one day he vanished, no warnings, no farewells, just silence. Some said he was dead. Others believed he had simply walked away, tired of the bloodshed. But the truth was something far more tragic. The only thing Elias had ever truly loved was taken from him. Lillian Kane, his wife, his anchor, his redemption, gone in an instant, and with her the only reason he had to keep killing. So he disappeared. Now he lived in a forgotten cabin on the outskirts of the city, far from the violence he once called home. His only companion? Titan, a canine warrior left behind by the military, discarded like an old weapon once he was deemed too broken to fight. A dog who, much like Elias, had been trained to kill, only to be thrown away when he was no longer useful. Together they had found peace in their exile. But peace is a fragile, temporary thing in a world built on blood and power. And tonight, that peace was about to be shattered beyond repair. It started like any other night. Elias sat by the fire, his calloused hands resting against the old leather leash beside him. He didn't use it much. Titan never needed it. The dog had seen more war than most soldiers, had faced down enemies that would make the average man piss himself. He didn't need orders. He just understood. That's why when Titan suddenly lifted his head, ears twitching, body going stone still, Elias didn't question it. He trusted the dog more than he had ever trusted any human. A low, rumbling growl vibrated in Titan's throat. His eyes, once filled with warmth, hardened into something predatory. Elias exhaled slowly, his mind shifting into something cold, something calculating. He reached for his gun, an old habit he had tried to break, but before he could grip it, the front door exploded inward. The first mistake they made was thinking he was just an old man. The second mistake was not realizing what Titan was. 3 men stepped inside, their faces cocky, weapons drawn, their body language that of men who had never once paid for their sins. They had no idea who they had just walked in on. The leader, a young punk with too much confidence, smirked. Luca Salieri, the son of Victor Salieri, the most powerful crime boss in the city. Elias recognized the name, but more importantly, he recognized the attitude. A spoiled brat who had spent his life getting whatever he wanted, surrounded by men who fought his battles for him. Elias didn't move. Luca chuckled, motioning toward the black muscle car parked outside. "Nice car, shame you're not gonna need it anymore." Titan's growl deepened. Luca's smirk twisted into something cruel. "And that mutt, hope you're not too attached?" The third mistake they made, threatening Titan. Elias didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even exhale, but something ancient, something lethal awakened inside him. Titan lunged, moving with the kind of deadly precision only a trained canine killer could. His teeth sank deep into the arm of the first man, dragging him to the ground before he could even scream. The other 2 scrambled back, cursing, fumbling with their weapons. Amateurs. Elias moved, fast, efficient, deadly. A quick strike to the throat sent one crumpling to the floor, gasping for breath. A second blow, sharp, brutal, ended it. Luca's cocky smirk was gone. Titan snarled, blood dripping from his teeth, standing between Elias and the last remaining intruder. "Jesus," Luca breathed, stepping back. His hands shook as he pulled out a gun with shaking fingers. This was supposed to be easy. And then, the moment everything changed. Titan moved to finish the job, and the gun went off. A single deafening crack. Elias's world stopped. Titan staggered mid-stride, his powerful body jerking violently. For a split second, he still tried to move forward, still tried to finish the fight, but then his legs collapsed beneath him. The sound that followed wasn't just a bark, it was a cry of agony, a sound that cut through Elias like a blade to the soul. Titan struggled to get up, his breathing ragged, his once unstoppable body betraying him. Elias forgot how to breathe. Luca didn't wait to see what happened next. He and his remaining man bolted out the door, stealing the car, laughing as they disappeared into the night. They thought it was over. They thought Elias Kane was just an old man who would grieve and move on. They were dead wrong. Elias fell to his knees beside Titan, his hands trembling as he reached for him. Blood soaked the wooden floor, seeping into the cracks, painting the world in red and injustice. Titan's eyes, God, those eyes, still tried to focus on him, still held on to that unbreakable loyalty, even as his body betrayed him one last time. Elias clenched his jaw, his breath shuddering. "Stay with me, boy." Titan's body shuddered, then in one final exhale, he was gone. A horrible, deafening silence filled the cabin. Elias did not cry, he just sat there, feeling something inside him break beyond repair. And in that silence, in that unforgivable moment, something long buried awoke inside him once more. The legend was back. And before the week was over, Lucas Salieri would understand what real fear was. The night was silent, too silent. Elias sat in the darkness, staring at the lifeless body of Titan, his breath slow, controlled, but his hands shook, not with grief, not with pain, with something far worse. Rage. A rage so pure, so consuming that it didn't burn, it froze him to the core. It was the kind of rage that made men do unspeakable things. The kind of rage that turned a man into a monster. And Elias Kane had once been the deadliest monster this city had ever known. But for years, he had kept it buried, locked away, until tonight, until they took Titan from him. Elias pressed his fingers against the wooden floor, where Titan's blood had seeped into the cracks, staining it permanently. His home, his peace, his only companion in this world, all of it, destroyed, by some punk-ass rich kid who had never earned a single thing in his life. Lucas Salieri had made a mistake tonight. A mistake so big, so unforgivable, that the city itself would bleed for it. Elias inhaled one last slow breath, steadying himself. Titan deserved better than this. And if there was one thing Elias had learned in all his years of killing, it was that justice didn't exist in this world. Only vengeance. And vengeance was something Elias Kane had spent a lifetime perfecting. The first shovelful of dirt hit the ground with a dull thud. Elias's hands, blood-stained and calloused, gripped the wooden handle of the shovel tightly, his arms moving with slow, mechanical precision. He dug deep, far deeper than necessary, because Titan deserved more than a shallow grave. The only sound in the night was the soft rustling of trees, the distant hum of the city in the background, a city that had no idea it had just signed its own death warrant. Elias didn't speak, he didn't whisper goodbyes, he didn't pray. Because Titan hadn't believed in words. Titan had believed in actions, and Elias would honor him in the only way that mattered, by tearing down the entire Salieri empire, brick by fucking brick. When the grave was finished, Elias gently laid Titan to rest, wrapping the K9 in an old military blanket. His fingers brushed over the scarred fur, remembering every fight they had survived together. Every night Titan had sat by his side, a silent guardian in the darkness. Elias placed one final thing in the grave, a small silver tag scratched and worn from the first collar Titan had ever worn. It had only one word engraved on it. Titan. The last thing Elias had left in this world, and now it was gone. The final shovel of dirt covered the past, and Elias Kane rose from the grave, a different man. The cabin wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, a tomb filled with ghosts and weapons. Elias had tried to walk away from this life, but a man like him never truly leaves. He had always known, deep down, that one day, he'd need to be that man again. And tonight was that night. He pulled up the old wooden floorboards, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, a past that had been buried for too long, a custom-built Glock 34 fitted with a suppressor, a combat knife, the blade still razor-sharp, extra magazines filled with armor-piercing rounds, a black tactical vest, worn but still reliable. And at the very bottom, a faded, blood-stained photo. A woman, Lillian Kane, his wife, his everything, his first loss. Titan had been the last thing she ever gave him before she died. And now he had lost them both. Elias exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders, feeling the weight of the weapons settle against his body like a second skin. A ritual. A return to who he was. Then he turned toward the mirror. The man staring back at him wasn't the man who had buried his dog an hour ago. This man was something else. Something colder. Something deadlier. Something that wouldn't stop until the entire Salieri family was nothing but corpses. The city was alive with neon and crime, pulsing like a beast that had never stopped feeding. And tonight, Elias was the predator. The first target was easy. Salieri's men loved to drink at a high-end club downtown, the kind of place where the rich mixed with the powerful and the criminals felt untouchable. Elias walked through the doors like a ghost returning home. The music pounded. The air smelled like whiskey and sweat. And there, at a corner booth, laughing like the world belonged to him, was Marco Salieri, Luca's older cousin, a spoiled piece of shit who had never lifted a gun in his life, but who loved to act like he ran this city. He didn't even see Elias coming. 1 second he was drinking. The next, Elias had him in a chokehold, dragging him into the men's bathroom, slamming the door shut. What? Marco choked, struggling as Elias shoved him against the sink, the cold metal of a silencer pressed under his chin. Elias didn't speak. He didn't need to. Marco gasped, eyes darting wildly. Look man, whatever you want." Elias twisted the gun harder, silencing him. His voice was ice. "Luca?" Marco's mouth opened and closed. He knew, and that's when the fear set in. You're him," Marco whispered, his voice barely audible. Elias tilted his head slightly. "Who am I?" Marco swallowed hard. His face had gone pale, his body trembling. The ghost. Elias let the silence stretch, the weight of those words sinking in. Then he pulled the gun back slightly. "You're gonna tell me where Luca is?" Marco shook his head violently. "I can't. If my uncle finds out?" Crack. Elias slammed his fist into Marco's gut, knocking the air out of him. Marco collapsed to his knees, wheezing. Elias crouched down, gripping Marco's hair, forcing him to look up. "You should be more afraid of me than your uncle." Marco choked out something between a laugh and a sob. You don't understand. Victor's already protecting him, hiding him. You'll never get close." Elias smiled. "A cold, dead thing. That's where you're wrong." He stood, pressing the barrel of the silencer against Marco's forehead. Click. Marco's body went still, his voice shook. "Please." Elias exhaled. "This isn't personal." And then, without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. Luca Salieri thought he was safe. His father thought he had bought enough time. They were both wrong, because Elias Kane was coming. And the war had just begun. The air in the city was thick with the scent of corruption and gasoline, the kind of night where men made deals with the devil and didn't expect to pay the price. They should have, because tonight, the devil wasn't coming to bargain. He was coming to collect. The news of Marco Salieri's execution spread fast. The underworld whispered. The Salieri family tightened their grip. And Luca? He started running, like a coward, like prey. But it was already too late. Elias had his scent. Victor Salieri had done what any desperate king would do. He sent an army. They came in black SUVs, heavily armed, surrounding Elias's cabin like they were trying to suffocate the inevitable. 7 men. He counted their footsteps on the gravel, heard the metallic clinks of rifles being loaded, the hushed, urgent voices. They thought they had him, thought they had finally caged the wolf. They were wrong, because Elias Kane had never been prey. And tonight he was going to remind them. The first mistake they made? They assumed he was inside. They crept toward the cabin, moving in coordinated silence, thinking they were about to ambush a man asleep in his bed. Elias was already behind them, in the dark woods where the shadows moved like ghosts and the night swallowed screams whole. He struck like a phantom. Silenced gunfire snapped through the air. The first man went down without a sound, a clean bullet to the base of his skull. The second had just enough time to hear the whisper of death before the combat knife carved his throat open. The third? He turned, wild-eyed, panicked, only to feel Elias's hands wrap around his face and twist his neck until it snapped like dry wood. 3 bodies down. The remaining 4 men realized, far too late, that they were the ones being hunted. "Shit! He's here!" One of them swung his rifle around, frantically scanning the trees, but the forest only answered with silence. A silence so thick it felt suffocating. Then, movement, a flicker of a shadow. One of the men fired blindly. Bullets ripped through the night, shattering branches, kicking up dirt, wasted shots. Elias was already behind them. The gunfire masked the sound of his approach, the chaos blinding them to the real danger. The 4th man barely turned before Elias slammed a blade into his ribs, driving it so deep that his body seized. Elias yanked it free. One sharp, brutal motion. The body crumpled. The final 3 tried to fall back, barking orders into their radios. "He's taking us apart. We need Bang. A single shot. The radio slipped from the man's fingers as his head snapped backward, blood misting the cold air. 2 left, and by now they were running. The last two men abandoned their fallen comrades, sprinting toward the SUVs, fumbling for the doors, scrambling for an escape that would never come. Elias didn't chase. He didn't need to. He already had the kill shot lined up. 2 bullets. 2 bodies collapsing onto the cold pavement. The silence returned, and this time, no one was left alive to break it. Elias stood over the carnage, blood dripping from his knife, his breath even. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small metal tag, Titan's tag. He dropped it onto the chest of the final body. A message. A promise. This was just the beginning. By morning, the underworld was in chaos. Victor Salieri's men were terrified. The ones who survived refused to leave their homes. The ones brave enough to answer their phones, they were already packing their bags, looking for the fastest way out of the city. Because they knew. They knew the truth. Elias Kane wasn't just coming after them. He was going to erase them, one by one. No deals, no second chances. Just blood, just retribution, just the justice that Titan never got. The list was getting smaller. But Elias wasn't rushing this. This wasn't revenge in a blind fury. This was a methodical dismantling. And next on the list, Paulo Salieri, a senior enforcer, the one who gave the order to kill Titan, the one who pulled the trigger. Elias found him in a penthouse above the city, surrounded by bodyguards, drinking whiskey like he wasn't already dead. Elias didn't sneak in. He walked straight through the front doors. The first guard tried to stop him. Elias put a bullet in his kneecap, let him scream. The second pulled a gun. Elias shot him in the head before he even finished drawing it. The third, he ran. Elias led him. He wanted them to know he was here. Wanted Paulo to hear every single footstep as he ascended the marble staircase. Wanted him to feel the inevitability of his fate. By the time Elias kicked the penthouse doors open, Paulo was already on his knees, begging, tears in his eyes, hands trembling, a coward. Elias raised the silenced pistol, aiming between his eyes. "I'll give you anything," Paulo gasped. "Money, protection, women, anything you want," Elias exhaled. Titan had never begged. Titan had died defending Elias, teeth bared, unafraid. This man, he wasn't worth a bullet. Elias holstered the gun, pulled the knife instead. And when Paulo realized what was about to happen, his screams echoed across the city. Long into the night, Victor Salieri had watched 2 generations of his bloodline be wiped from the earth in a single week. Marco, Paulo, nearly a dozen soldiers. And now Elias was coming for his son. Luca was still hiding, still clinging to the illusion that money and power could protect him. But money couldn't buy salvation. Not anymore, because Elias Kane had nothing left to lose. And he was coming to finish this. Not just for Titan. Not just for revenge. But because Luca had made the mistake of thinking a man like Elias could be stolen from and left alive. He was about to learn the truth. And when he did, no one would be left alive. The city was drowning in fear. The streets that once belonged to Victor Salieri were now silent. The men who once wore his name hiding in the shadows, praying they weren't next. They all knew who was coming. They had seen the bodies, heard the whispers, felt the weight of the inevitable pressing down on them. And now? Now there was only one name left on Elias Kane's list. Luca Salieri, the man who had pulled the trigger. The man who had put a bullet in Titan's chest and walked away like it meant nothing. Elias was about to remind him exactly what it meant. And there was no hiding from hell. Luca had gone to the last place he thought Elias would look. A compound buried in the mountains, hours from the city, surrounded by armed guards, reinforced steel doors, and enough firepower to hold off an army. Too bad he wasn't up against an army. He was up against a ghost. A man with nothing left to lose. A man who had spent his entire life dismantling fortresses like this one. And tonight, he wasn't taking prisoners. The guards on the perimeter never saw it coming. Elias moved through the night like a shadow, his hands precise, his blade silent. The first dropped without a sound, his throat cut so cleanly he didn't even have time to gasp. The second never got the chance to reach for his radio. The third? Elias let him scream. Let him cry into the darkness as he felt the cold steel of a blade press against his ribs. "Wait," the man stammered, blood dripping from his lips. Elias's voice was calm, merciless. "Where is Luca?" The man shook his head, terror in his eyes. "I don't." Elias twisted the knife deeper, feeling the tremor of the man's last breath against his palm. "I wasn't asking." The body slumped to the ground, lifeless. Now they knew he was here. The first explosion lit up the night like a funeral pyre. The second turned the front gate into rubble. Men scrambled, barking orders into radios, firing blindly into the darkness. But Elias wasn't in the darkness anymore. He was already inside. The first shot split through the skull of a guard standing near the entrance, his body crumpling before the others could even react. The second took out a man trying to run. The third, Elias let him live, just long enough to watch his entire world burn. They thought they were ready for him. They weren't. By the time Elias reached the main house, the bodies were already stacked high behind him, blood soaking into the dirt, staining the walls. And then, there was no one left but Luca. Elias found him in a panic room, cowering, sweat dripping down his face, his hands shaking as he fumbled with his gun, praying for salvation that wasn't coming. The steel door had held back gunfire, had kept out the men trying to kill him, but it couldn't keep out Elias Kane. Boom. The door ripped from its hinges, the force of the explosion throwing Luca to the ground, his body slamming into the wall. He coughed, gasping for air, trying to reach for his gun. But Elias was already there. A boot crushed his wrist, the gun skidding across the floor, Luca screaming in pain. Elias stood over him, silent, unmoving, like a force of nature that had finally arrived to claim what was his. "Please," Luca choked. Elias didn't blink. "You put a bullet in my dog." Luca sobbed, shaking his head. It wasn't personal. Elias kneeled, gripped the knife at his belt, tilted his head. "No." His voice was calm, deadly. "It is now." The final scream was swallowed by the night, and then there was nothing left of Luca Salieri. The world moved on, the city forgot, the empire Victor Salieri built crumbled. His men abandoned him, the underworld changed hands, and Elias Kane disappeared. The only thing left behind? A collar. Left in the ruins of Luca's safe house. The only message Elias ever gave the world. This was for Titan. Elias drove without destination, without purpose. He had done what needed to be done, but now there was nothing left. His hands clenched the wheel, the road stretching infinitely ahead of him, the past whispering in the back of his mind. Titan's tag was in his pocket. He ran his fingers over it, closed his eyes, took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he let himself feel the weight of it all. And as he exhaled, he whispered, "It's over, buddy." The car disappeared into the horizon. And just like that, Elias Kane became a ghost. This wasn't just a story about revenge. This was about justice. This was about a dog who gave everything for his master, and a master who burned the world to the ground for him. Because in the end, Titan wasn't just a dog. He was family. And family doesn't get left behind.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.